Welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, despite John Kerry promising China neutrality on the South China Sea, the U.S. Monday issued a joint statement with Japan, Australia on the dispute, with U.S. and Japan boosting military cooperation. What lies ahead for relations in the region? And the build-up to the Rio Olympic Games has been plagued by stories of Brazil's economic pressure, security concerns, the Zika virus, and the Russian doping scandal. Can the 2016 Games be a success? And we begin today's show in Japan, where Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of that country has met with the head of the U.S. Pacific Command. The two sides agreed to boost military cooperation and signed an arms deal worth over $800 million US. U.S. Pacific Command Harry Harris said he believed the U.S.-Japan alliance is the key to peace and stability in the Asia region. But could these arms really bring peace and stability, considering Japan's revived military doctrine? Before we go to the panel, let's take a look at this.
Reinforcing defenses. The United States and Japan struck a bargain to enhance bilateral military cooperation in Asia. Japan will import 246 SM-2 missiles to equip 6 Aegis-class destroyers. The agreement was announced as Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe met with the head of the U.S. Pacific Command, Admiral Harry Harris, in Tokyo on Tuesday. The meeting follows a defense white paper released by Japan last week. China's maritime operations in the South China Sea and East China Sea once again became the target of the 2016 white paper.
The Chinese issue becomes more and more frequent in Japan's white papers in recent years. The rhetoric of the 2016 paper is more like the U.S. style, such as accusing China of militarization in the South China Sea region.
These moves all come in the wake of a non-binding decision by an arbitration tribunal in The Hague on the disputed areas in the South China Sea. China and ASEAN members reached consensus during the foreign ministers' meeting on Monday on the implementation of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. China has advocated the dual-track approach, saying disputes should be resolved peacefully through negotiation between the parties directly concerned.
China believes the page of the deeply flawed and inconsistent arbitration tribunal ruling that severely lacks legitimacy has been turned. Therefore, the temperature of the hype brought by the tribunal case should be lowered, and the solution to the South China Sea issue should be rectified and returned to the right track.
However, Japan, the U.S., and Australia issued a joint statement on the same day, urging China and the Philippines to obey the tribunal. Chinese foreign minister slammed the statement, accusing them of double standards. It says the involvement of unrelated parties will only add more uncertainty to the issue.
And for more on the topic, we're joined here in our Beijing studio by Mr. Teng Jianqun, who is the director for the Center for Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. Also joining us from Washington, D.C., inside the United States, we're having Mr. Kurt Volker, who is the former U.S. ambassador to NATO and now CEO of McCain Institute for International Leadership. Welcome as well, Ambassador Volker. Let's begin with you, Ambassador Volker, about the U.S.-Japan military deal, including maritime vessels and also missiles. What do you think about all of these deals? Is it likely to be the beginning of a military buildup in the region?
Well, I think you have to look at two different things. One of them is North Korea and its development of nuclear weapons and long-range missile capability. And so the Aegis destroyers and the missile defense systems that are being developed and sold for those are really to help protect Japan against the one-off missile threats that may come from North Korea, and also to help tackle the potential long-range or intercontinental missile threats from North Korea. Under Kim Jong-un, North Korea has become increasingly unpredictable and aggressive, so that's that side. The other is in the maritime area, where, as the earlier report indicated, there is a growing awareness of China's increased military action and presence in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and the militarization of some territorial claims. And where there are disputes, that obviously runs the risk of conflict. And I think it's important for everyone in the region to try to avoid conflict like that and try to maintain stability. In order
Right.
to do that, I think it's important that every country have a strong, capable military and that they communicate well.
Well, the South China Sea does not have much to do with Japan, though, when it comes to the argument. But
No, the East
Mr.
China
Tang,
Sea.
let me go to you about this. Do you think this is likely to be a dangerous cycle of military buildup and therefore more claims of territories by all sides, further buildup, further disputes, further escalation of tensions?
Yeah, I think there is a possibility for all the parties concerned in this region to continue the build-up of military power, especially for the countries like Japan, the Philippines. They might, have some reasons to, acquire equipment from the United States. This is actually a very contradicted situation in this region. Some countries just manipulate the tension, actually initiated, as Mr. Walker just said, from DPRK, from the South China dispute. I don't think this is a good reason for the countries to continue the military build-up in this region, because China's military development, China's military reform in recent years actually had their own approach, that is to have efficient capability to maintain the peace and stability in this region, and also to safeguard the national interest in the South China Sea. This is actually,
Is China's national interest going contradictory to the others' national interest in this regard?
it's hard to say in that way, but I think the determination to defend our territory integrity and to safeguard the peace and stability in Eastern China Sea, South China Sea, actually show the new momentum of the situation development. And
I see.
China is very willing to show the capability, as we have witnessed in recent days. The
Okay.
military drills gave a very strong signal to the outside world. China does have such a capability to defend its national interests.
Ambassador Volker, here comes an interesting question. The United States Secretary of State, Mr. Kerry, has met with the Chinese side, and he talked about the U.S. Neutrality on the South China Sea issue. And yet, U.S., Japan, and also Australia, the three countries which do not, by the way, all of them have much to do with the South China Sea, signed an agreement suggesting that all sides have to come to the arbitration award and many other issues. So here it seems to be an apparent conflict between what U.S. has promised and what U.S. has been doing together with Japan and Australia. Ambassador Volker.
Well, thank you. First off, to reiterate, the U.S. does not take a position on the ownership of particular islands in the South China Sea. We recognize that they are disputed. China claims them, Philippines claims them, Vietnam claims other ones. We recognize that there's a dispute, and therefore think everyone should refrain from unilateral actions that militarize or run the risk of conflict. In that circumstance, when you have a court, such as the International Court did, issue a directive, that can become a baseline for everyone that can give a guideline. It can be something that, if followed, would prevent any conflict. So that's a reason for supporting the decision of the court. In addition to that, the U.S. does have a very strong policy in support of access by all countries to what are seen as international waters, not anyone's particular waters. And in that, the U.S. does have a role in the South China Sea, and has for a long time, in helping to maintain stability and peace in that area.
Have we gone back after all of this, already 5 minutes or 6-minute discussion between the two of you, to the old days? It seems that yesterday once more, everybody stick to their original points, and the military buildup still continues. There's likely to be very different views among many of the issues that we have touched on, whether it's military or peace issues, or the economic cooperation issues. So, Mr. Tang, what has changed? Well, we hasn't even changed anything over the past half year, even a few years.
Yeah, I think it seems to us that the situation in the South China Sea has already returned to the original point. And
What is the original
the
point?
reason that all the parties concerned would like to have a negotiation, to have dialogue, as said this time, by the ministers, in the comprehensive implementation of the COC. All the dispute in the South China Sea should be, find a solution from the relevant countries in this region. And also, the only way to solve this dispute is negotiation. So I think all the parties concerned this time, including the other ASEAN member states, they gave such a consensus. We are going to have a negotiation again.
But Mr. Tong, let me remind you.
Yeah.
What you have just said is a communique
Yeah.
that has been signed between China and the ASEAN countries.
Yeah.
That does not involve Japan, Australia, and the United States. You have heard from Ambassador Volker very clearly, these three countries has their own set of agreements, which might necessarily match what has been the communique content between China and the ASEAN countries. So that's my question, really, Mr. Tong.
Yeah.
That we are coming back to the old days, that everybody go to their own points, and there seems to be conflicts once again. Are we going to follow the same road as we did over the past few years, once again in the South China Sea?
I think the big change is the the Secretary of State, John Kerry, just gave such a statement that the United States will never take position on the ruling. This is not the position toward the dispute in the South China Sea. We should have a clarification here. John Kerry's statement is just related to the ruling of the arbitration initiated by the Philippines. And actually, the United States, in my opinion, has taken position in recent years in the dispute in the South China Sea, which is opposite to the position of China. And the United States just stand with the countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and other claimants.
So you consider that is a U-turn almost attitude coming from Washington. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Tong?
No, I don't think this is a U-turn for Washington to change its South China policy, as Mr. Bork just mentioned. Washington has shown its great concern in this region, even after the statement by John Kerry that no position in the ruling. But the three countries, the United States, Japan, and Australia, gave another statement.
So, Ambassador Volker, please help us to understand from your perspective. You are an insider in Washington. So, are we going to see an issue of disputes concerning territories and also people's attitude toward one another while China is rising in the region, while the U.S. is doing pivot to Asia? That the U.S. is changing its approach toward the issue in the South China Sea, not necessarily changing its attitude. These are two very different issues. One is approach, how to implement the attitude. The other is the attitude itself, which is the ultimate goal. So what do you think, which has changed, or anything has changed at all?
Yeah, what has changed is the way in which China has acted in its claims for these islands over the past few years. There has been a dispute over these islands for decades, and very little has happened over time that changed the status in the real world until the last couple of years. And no one begrudges China the ability to have a strong military. I think they should have a strong military. Every country should be able to have a professional, capable military to defend itself. But what we've seen is China using that military to put airfields onto these islands, to do land reclamation, to much more assertively claim this territory for China, these islands, the sea space. That is what's changed. And in that environment, I think you're seeing countries who dispute that themselves, like the Philippines, or you're seeing the United States, which views the importance of international transit here, speak up more to push back on what we see happening in the region.
Right. Ambassador Volker, we're going to let the Chinese guests explain as to what changed from China. But to you, I still want to insist on that question. Is that a change of attitude after the award from the so-called arbitration, which China would not recognize, by the United States? Or is there a change of approach goals and approach, which one is it? Or nothing has changed from your perspective about the U.S.?
Well, that's what I'm saying is nothing has actually changed in
Okay.
the U.S. approach.
All right.
In the
And
U.S.
Mr.
policy. It's very consistent with what it has been for a very long time.
Great. Mr. Tang, respond, please.
Yeah, I quite agree with what Mr. Walker just said. The United States has never changed its policies position in the South China Sea. This
Right.
is only a position toward the ruling of the arbitration. There are 4 reasons I can
Exactly.
give you. The first reason is that the United States would not like to be involved in such a ridiculous ruling, because, for example, the ruling just turned the Taiping Island, its island into a rock. It's ridiculous. This is the first reason. The second reason is the President Obama only has 5 months in office as a president of peace. I'm sure President Obama would like to maintain the name of the
Well,
president
you may
of
know,
peace.
Mr.
And-
Tang, the peace in one's eyes might not be the kind of peace
Yeah.
in the others.
And-
So the kind of peace we're talking about could be different. Ambassador Volker, how much do you think at this moment, 5 months build up, 100 days to the next presidential election, Washington, especially the White House, would be able to maintain its attention and the capability of handling policy issues toward this part of the region? This is one part of the question. The other part of the question is, will that leave a lot of free-willing space for whatever ministries or departments, including the Pentagon, to go its own way?
So I think that's a great question, because in other parts of the world I would be quite concerned. I think in the Middle East I would be concerned, or even in Eastern Europe, such as Ukraine. In East Asia, however, we've had a very consistent policy adhered to by the State Department, the Pentagon, under successive administrations, going back to George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, President Obama. Our East Asia policy and approach here has been very consistent. I think that's very important because it is stabilizing, and it does, I think, minimize the risk that in a period of political transition, as we are going through now over the next year, that there would be any surprises. I don't think you'll see a lack of attention or lack of consistency from the U.S. In East Asia.
And Mr. Tang, China has been reforming its military. We have also heard the latest reports today, even the Chinese president and who is the chairman of the Chinese Military Commission talked about the reform of the military. That, of course, is a domestic issue. However, at the same time, we're looking at the territorial disputes, at a new beginning point on the issue of South China Sea between China and its ASEAN neighbors. So what do you make of all of these factors, and how is that likely to influence the directions of this issue, including China taking into consideration the U.S. election cycle?
Yeah, first I should say this time after this round of competition in the South China Sea, some said this is a victory of our diplomacy. I'd like to add another victory, if we can. It's actually a military victory. This time China, I mean the decision makers of China would like to use a comprehensive leverages, in maintaining peace and stability, and to continue the momentum of dialogue and negotiation with relevant countries, including the United States. And our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, had a very good discussion with Secretary of State John Kerry in Laos. So this is actually a new tendency for the Chinese government to have fully imprinted measures in this region to continue the peace and stability. I think this is a condition for our domestic development.
All right. Before we go, 20 seconds from each of you, I guess, gentlemen. Many have been talking about the dispute. It has been a proxy dispute between China and the United States via U.S. allies in the region. So, after all of this drama, have the two sides calm down and really be able to think about the future that they are responsible for? Let me go to you, Ambassador Volker, first. 20 seconds for you, sir.
Okay, first off, I don't think it's fair to refer to the Philippines or Vietnam or others as proxies of the U.S. They're genuine countries, they have their own interests. Secondly, both the United States and China want to maintain peace and stability. We do not seek a conflict. And because of that, I'm confident that while we will continue to have disagreements, we will also continue to manage them.
Mr. Teng, 20 seconds for you as well.
In my opinion, actually, this is a security dilemma between the two countries, and between China and the United States. Especially in recent years, we have witnessed the direct confrontation between the two navies in the South China Sea. So it's a dilemma. How can we find a new approach out of the dilemma is the number one job for the two countries' decision makers.
Uncharted territories for both.
Yeah.
But we hope the policymakers are smart enough to figure something that is excellent answers for both. Ambassador Kurt Volker from the US and Mr. Teng Jianchun from Beijing. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Security is now an issue for all Olympic Games, but Brazil is also dealing with domestic political problems, the Zika virus, and the Russian doping scandal. Will the Rio 2016 game make the country proud? The 2016 Olympics in Rio are just around the corner. It's a huge event with thousands of athletes from all around the world competing for medals in a variety of sports. But this time, amid the excitement and anticipation, there's also widespread concern about whether the city and the country are ready to host the event. Let's take a look.
Gathering for a great celebration of sports. 10,500 athletes taking part, 206 countries competing, 32 different venues in Rio. But there are still many challenges ahead. Security is perhaps Rio's biggest concern. Brazilian police arrested 10 people last Thursday on suspicion of preparing acts of terrorism during the Games. Security levels have been heightened.
All the security forces in Brazil have been mobilized. The local police force here in Rio, the national security forces, the federal police, and the armed forces. I think it is a very impressive mobilization.
Brazil is trying to ensure everybody enjoys the sporting event, but for some Russian athletes, their 4 years of waiting have proved pointless. After the country's track and field athletes were banned from the Rio Olympics, 37 other Russian athletes also lost their chance of entering the competition. Russian President Vladimir Putin criticized the ban, calling it a short-sighted political scheme.
A deliberate campaign which targeted our athletes included double standards and the principle of collective responsibility, or as it was said, a cancellation of the presumption of innocence. That is incompatible with sport and in general with justice and elementary rules of law.
As athletes from around the world began to arrive at the Olympic Village, some chose to stay elsewhere. The Australian delegation had initially lodged its athletes in hotels because the Olympic installations were simply not safe or ready. The Italian stayed, but hired its own plumbers and electricians. However, the new International Olympic Committee chief believes Rio is ready.
What we have seen now in the way here all the people responsible reacted to the challenges in the Olympic Village make us very, very confident it will be great Olympic Games a la Brazil.
Although there are only less than 10 days to go, many things remain to be done if Rio is to live up to its promise to show the world a great spectacle.
And for more on the Rio Olympic Games, we are joined here in Beijing in the studio, Mr. Yan Qiang, founder of the Score Sport. Welcome,
yes,
sir.
thank you.
And also from London, we're having Mr. Carlos Caicedo, who is Senior Principal Analyst at Latin America Risk Analysis Desk from IHS Markit. Meanwhile, in Athens, Ohio, United States, we're joined by Mr. Robert Boland. He is Executive in Residence at Department of Sports Administration with Ohio University. Welcome to the three of you, gentlemen. First of all, of course, when it comes to the Rio Olympic Games, the first challenge is the doping issue. Even though IOC has already ruled the different kinds of sports association will be responsible for the final decision, we are seeing, Professor Boland, that the Russian, at least the track and field teams, 100 strong almost, will not be able to make to the Rio game. President Putin from Russia, Professor, said it's huge discrimination against Russia. What do you say?
Well, I think it's a little less discriminatory given the acts that have been documented in the McLaren report and the issues of a widespread state-sponsored doping and doping evasion, so that the track and field international governing body has said this is outrageous and we have to do something. Other governing bodies where there's doping is a little less of an issue, and that there's sports probably a little less so, but I think Putin is playing some politics with it, and it is a challenge, and it does cast its pall over the games, but it's real.
But Mr. Yan, as you may know, Moscow thinks very differently, as we said earlier, and also many of the sportsmen and women in the track and field delegation from Russia will not be able to participate. They think differently. Isinbayeva, for example, who is very well known, of course, the pole vaulter, she said, and she even cried at the farewell ceremony being held in Kremlin on Wednesday. What do you make of these excellent athletes will not be necessarily appear at Rio? Will that degrade the excellence of this game?
It's a very sad story, you know, especially for those top athletes like Isinbayeva. She didn't participate in the last Olympics. You know, she take her time to give birth to a child, raised her family, and now she's back in the race for more greatness in the Olympics. But you know, the claim all the investigation results will be on the kind of systemic doping in regarding to track and field teams.
So none of them could go
Russia.
there unless there is one high jumper only who trained in the United States.
Exactly.
So the whole team will not appear there. What does that mean for the level of performance, particularly track and field? Russia is one of those very strong countries.
Yeah, I think, you know, with all the evidence that we have, you know, it leaves the IAAF with no choice but, you know, just to ban this team. But anyhow, there is no blanket ban over the whole Russian delegation, which I think is a fair result.
However, there's also issues about the weightlifting team from Russia as well. Weightlifting is also a very strong point coming from Russia. Professor Boland, I have to go to you. What do you think this would mean for the overall performance of the Olympic Games? How do you think, even at the beginning of Rio, how is it likely to be remembered when it comes to its sports excellence?
Well, we've seen Olympic Games that have had boycotts that are very well remembered, Los Angeles in particular, and maybe single-handedly saved the Olympic movement because of the performance that took place. But it's hard to think about weightlifting without Russian athletes. It's hard to think about women's track and field without Russian athletes. So the competition is diminished, but the competition is organic in the Olympics, and any Olympic competition that takes place and has great moments of excellence, great moments of drama, and those kind of amazing moments that just arise spontaneously, they make the Olympics great. It's not the exclusion of athletes, because athletes can be injured, athletes can be suspended. It's really about the performances that take place in the 16 days.
But what does it say, Professor Boland, as a whole to the Olympic movement? Because we understand the IOC had a very difficult time this time, including the new president, Mr. Bach, who came up with this decision about the track and field team from Russia. So eventually, what would that mean? Will that arouse, and again, a movement of so-called anti-corruption, anti-doping in overall Olympic Games? And what would that mean for the IOC, which is already becoming quite fragile, I would say, over the past few years because of corruption scandals?
It's fair to say the IOC is in a fragile place. There were a number of cities around the world that have radically gone to great lengths to bid for the Olympics. That number has pulled back some. The Olympics have become more costly for reasons we're going to explore regarding security and other issues and venues. So there are fewer cities that are going to be anxious to bid on the Olympics. If it's too politicized, countries will pull back from their participation in the Olympics. So it is a fragile coalition right now, but it's also a very important coalition. So it probably puts the Olympics under a moment of some crisis, but it's not unlike ones we've seen before in the past. And I certainly think that these games, if everything goes well, can certainly redeem them. The Olympic movement survived a series of bad Olympics in the late 60s and early 70s, all beset by crisis, and came through it okay. I think this is more of a blip if it's settled in these games.
We saw the IOC becoming ever stronger as a result of those crises. We don't know where things are going from here. Before we go to our analyst about the economy, and Mr. Yan, I still want to ask you a question. China, of course, is becoming ever stronger player in the Olympic movement,
Yeah.
particularly after 2008, China hosted the game. But what does that mean for China's enthusiasm about the game, for Chinese viewers, 1.4 billion strong about this game?
It's a very complicated question.
It
because
is.
IOC is under huge pressure, and I would say those top three super international organizations, from IOC to FIFA to IAAF, the biggest three, they're all under structural pressures of reforming. But for China, China could be one of the silver link of kind of breakthrough. Maybe China could be a very coherent or insistent, consistent leader for all these top sports events. But considering the other countries, the other big capital cities, we witnessed the withdrawal of Boston, of Hamburg, of future Olympics biddings. Because Olympics have become just too expensive.
You think China will be still enthusiastic about that? A lot of local
so.
cities
I
will be
think
very
so.
much interested in it?
Yes, yes.
All right, interesting. Talk about the economic side. One of the key questions surrounding these games now, as both our analysts have provided, is how much impact that such improvement projects will have on life after the Olympic Games and how expensive it is. According to the non-governmental organization, the Council on Foreign Relations, the estimated final cost of the Rio game this time is about $20 billion when the initial plan only budgeted for around 14 billion. So that's a 6 billion difference. Rio's Olympic is expected to run 43% over budget. That is the Rio Times headline for the days. May I come back to you now, Mr. Caicedo, our analyst here. You probably know more about the economy than all of us. What does this mean for country like Brazil, which is now already under a lot of economic pressure? Not to mention that some of those delegation teams already complained of not sufficient not sufficient places to live or pollutions inside the places. So what would you say about this on the impact for Rio's economy and also the economy of Brazil? Mr. Caicedo.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you very much. I think we need to look this into the context in which Rio and Brazil secure the right to host the Olympic Games. It was in 2007, 2008. Then Brazil was basically booming. The economy was booming. Everything was fantastic for Brazil. At that particular moment, it looks like a great idea for Brazil to host the Olympic Games. The situation now is totally different because the country is in recession.
Right.
It is going to contract for 2 years in a row. And you are right, some of the estimates for the cost of the Olympic Games went over budget. And there is something more general here, is because of the cost of the Olympic Games, there is a new trend now looking at how wise it is for a country to go for the Olympic Games, bearing in mind that at the end of the day, the benefits are not going to be huge. In practice, the benefit for Rio would be visible in infrastructure. I mean, a new metro line, a new bus service,
That's
some
right.
new sites, but all the effort and all the international attention, all the criticism, all the negative headlines, you would wonder it really was worth the effort for Brazil. And to be honest, in the latest opinion poll, the majority, more than 50% of the Brazilians think that the Olympic Games was not a good idea for Brazil.
Mr. Yan, of course, China, particularly the city of Beijing, hosted the Olympic Games 2008. There were a lot of debates then. The debates still continue today. How to make use of the venues being built, how to make sure it's going to be sustainable income for those venues and also serve the public. These questions have not been answered 100%.
And they will not be answered entirely for the coming years. There are so many white elephants everywhere in every Olympic hosting cities. A week ago, actually not a week ago, a couple of days ago, there was a potential football match being cancelled, which was supposed to be hosted in the bird nest. Because of what? Because of the very bad condition of the pitch. And that is another story in regarding to bird nest.
Of course, this could be a sporadic case, but at the same time, how to make sure Olympic Games still be attractive, economically even, for those cities who want to host? I think that's a big question. Professor Boland, the LA Games back in the 80s started a money-earning path for Olympic Games. Since then, many cities want to join the team, but we've seen economic difficulties now once again over the past few years regarding Olympic Games. What would you say? They're still going to be attractive at all?
Well, the attractiveness of the Olympic Games still remain in about several dimensions. It does involve infrastructure. It does involve public health benefits and the creation of athletic and tourism infrastructure for a city. It also now has a recognition effect, which is very important. Ultimately, Brazil is in a worse position, as your guest in the UK made mention, than they were when their economy was booming. But this is an opportunity. An Olympic Games is an opportunity to bring world leaders of major corporations together to look for business opportunities in that country. It's one of the most powerful promotional opportunities for a country's domestic business and global business connectivity. So there's still that valuable aspect of it. It does provide benefits. The problem is the range of cities that can host an Olympics successfully and the number of cities that are bidding for them sometimes are disconnected. So for a city like Rio, which is hoping to gain more visitors, more tourists, greater advantage of infrastructure, perhaps more business for Brazil, all that still works. It may not happen given the economic circumstances, but for a city like Los Angeles, which has most of its facilities extant, in other words, in existence right now, a city like Berlin, again, the Olympics represent a little bit different opportunity, and I think Beijing now falls into that category, even though tenants for the bird's nest, tenants for the water cube weren't as easy to find as they might be in some of the Western nations. It still fits as a place to come back to, and the Chinese economy, it being as expansive as it is helped.
Okay, but having said that though, some suggest there has been prejudice against the developing countries and emerging economies when they are becoming the hosts of important international sports games. For example, the Olympic Games. Remember Beijing? There were a lot of negative reporting.
Remember Athens?
My God, before leading up to the game. But when the opening ceremony began, everybody say, this is a perfect game. We will never have it. It's exceptional. It's beautiful. So are we seeing once again what happened with so many Olympic Games? London game, the same as well, Mr. Yan. So it seems that the level of complaints have always been there, but when the game begins, are we really still going to be carried away by these branches of issues?
When the game begins, our attention being switched, to the matches, to the games.
Yes,
but
indeed.
the questions, the challenges are still there. Even London, I remember in the beginning of 2012, even 6 months before the London Olympics, Lord Sebastian Coe, he admitted that they failed to deliver what the slogan saying, to inspire a generation. We couldn't inspire a generation. We couldn't even encourage, 1 million more youth people from the UK to participate more regularly into sports. The challenges are still there. I think, if we want really improved condition of the Olympics, we need to start reform from the top, from IOC. And the Olympics have to change. We have to look for a new format, whether it's a perennial avenue, a place for the future Olympics, or why don't you just diffuse the Olympics, spread it globally?
Well, you go very political now. Well, let's go to Mr. Kai Saito to see his opinion. Sir, before we wrap up, it is not just the economic issues, it is also the economic cost of cleaning up the air, clean the water. There were so many complaints coming from athletes about the water being used for outside water sports. Some were even suggested human wastes out there, even the dead bodies they could see in some of the media reports. So do you think the Brazilian side will clean further the air and the water just to make for the Olympic Games a little bit better this time in Rio? And by the way, I'm very much looking forward to it, no matter how much negative reporting are there, to the wonderful, excellent sports performances there. But Mr. Kai Saito, what do you think about that possibility?
Well, I think there are two two particular sites which were promised to clean up the water. One is the Guanabara Bay, which you're going to have the sailing competition, and the Rodrigo Freites Lake. The targets were missed. All the money and the promises to clean up those waters were not met, and already the Rio authority had admitted that it will never be met. But on the other hand, if you look at the Barra de Tijuca, which is the new Olympic village.
That's right.
I visited last week, and it looks impressive. I think they're going to have new site. They have a new transport system linking Barra de Tijuca, which is an upmarket area, to the rest of Rio de Janeiro. The facility looks great. So I see a legacy there in terms of sport infrastructure, in terms of transportation for sure.
All right.
The hotels are 100% capacity. Even people in the favelas close to Copacabana and to Ipanema now are renting the houses to foreigners, to backpackers.
Right.
So I think gradually the city is warming up to the Olympic Games, but in respect to cleaning up the waters, it has failed.
All right, we are running out of time. Of course, we have a lot to discuss leading up to the Olympic Games. That's why we're leading to some of the topics for another discussion. For now, let's all wish this Olympic game in Rio a great success. Oh, I'm not going, but we have a lot of colleagues over there with CCTV that are covering the event. We're looking forward to all of those reports. Yan Chang here in Beijing with us, Carlos Caicedo in London, and also Robert Boland in the United States. Thank you so much, sir and gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China.